I'm your producer, Todd Bartu, and this is Offshore Explorer. Offshore Explorer looks at the world from the sailor's point of view, port by port. Together, we share stories that detail the important intersections between sailing, culture, and life, past, present, and future. Coming up on today's episode, the search for Drake's treasure and the last pirate of the Caribbean. But first, let me introduce our host, a lifelong sailor who has traveled the world, raced international 14s, and crossed the Atlantic countless times. A published author who has written for both stage and screen, Mr. Scott Dodgson.
Hey Todd, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, festive, everything. How are you today?
I'm doing great, and happy holidays to you, and Merry Christmas to all of our listeners. So what do we have planned for this week's episode?
Well, this week I'm talking about having Christmas at the Bitter End Yacht Club. I spent, I think, about 17 Christmases at the Bitter End Yacht Club, out on a mooring, meeting some wonderful people. I talk about a couple of the characters, and specifically one character, and it's sort of it's about being at the edge of the world and Christmas and what it means.
Okay, great. Take it away, Scott.
18 degrees, 30 minutes, 17 seconds north. 64 degrees, 27 minutes, 19 seconds west, is where I spent approximately 17 Christmases. This location is the location of the Bitter End Yacht Club and Saba Rock. And it's notable for a couple of reasons. This is my little Christmas episode, and it's more of a sailor's Christmas episode, because as a sailor, you're almost always away from home, and home becomes a kind of idea. But sitting at the bitter end on a mooring, with the bow of the boat bobbing, pointing directly into the trades, a little southeast, there was a wind, a steady 15 knots, just sort of warm air rolling over you day in, day out. You're protected in the North Sound of Virgin Gorda by a deep and long reef that's filled with fish and other artifacts, and it's just an interesting place. It's a beautiful place. But it is the sort of elbow of the Windward Islands. It is nothing but ocean beyond that reef. It is all the way to Europe from that reef. A little southeast, you'll have Anguilla, you'll have St. Martin, and the curvature of the Windward Islands goes down through Guadeloupe and St. Martin and the Grenadines and all the way down to Trinidad. But this very, very point on the map is significant in the sense that having spent so many Christmases there on charter. Now, when you charter, Christmas is a great time because you make a lot of money. It's a premium time, and you spend a lot of time with people you don't know on Christmas. And it's not like inviting people from that you know. For example, like, come on over to the house and spend Christmas with us. It's not like that at all. This is an economic thing. You're there to facilitate their happiness, to entertain them, to feed them, to take them to places. And the Bitter End always had a great Christmas celebration. They had a barge with a Christmas tree on it, and Santa Claus was all brightly lit, and they would drive around the anchorage, and music would be blaring, and the hotel would be festooned with lights, and you could get a great Christmas meal there if you got in advance. I particularly liked going into the club, to the bar later at night after all the meals had been served, and just sort of relaxing and sitting around with everybody. That was always a pleasure for me. But I wanted to address an issue of standing on the bow of your boat, looking over the reef, little curlers coming in over the reef, because the reef is, 10, 15 feet below the surface of the water. Little swell maybe gathers. But beyond that, you're kind of at the edge of the world. At least that was what I sort of thought. In my mind, I was at the edge of the world. And somebody who made me think about that, and quite deeply, was a man named Burt Kilbride. Now, he and his wife owned Saba Rock, and I'm sure there's a lot of you out there that have been to Virgin Gorda and have gone to Saba Rock, and I post some pictures on that, and have seen, food, bar. That's it. That was his advertisement. But Burt was a very, very kind of interesting guy. He was His Majesty's receiver of rec in the territory, which is a special title. He was a celebrity. Not only did they make some movies about him and some shows, his rock, Saba Rock, which they say is an acre and a half, which I don't believe. It's way less than that. Was a very popular watering hole, and I found it to be one of the most interesting places to go over by Dinghy. Many of you have been there, I'm sure, and have sat down on the deck, and Burt has been there, and Burt died, he was almost 100 years old. He dove. He was part of the diving team with Jacques Cousteau. He's done wrecks. He's been all over the world. He's a very famous. He's in the Divers Hall of Fame, and he's got stories. And his moniker was the last Caribbean pirate. Now, I had known Burt for close to 18 years. I would always go up to the North Sound with my charters. I chartered for 18 years in the Virgin Islands. And I would go up there, take a mooring ball, stay a night, always go over and see Burt, say hey. And we had conversations over time. I remember his wife Gail and their son running around. It was sort of like it was just like out of Robinson Crusoe, the house and the bar and all the rest of that kind of stuff. And it was just an enjoyable place to sit and stare back across the sound. And Burt would tell stories, but he did more than that. He sort of fired the imagination of people, because Burt was such a unique person, and his lifestyle was so unique and so 16th century, I should add. And it always made me think about coming to, as they say, the bitter end. And for those of you who do not know what the bitter end is on a line or a piece of rope, you have the end that you're working with, and then you have the tail end, as landlubbers might call it, a tail end. And that's called the bitter end. But it also refers to being kind of at the edge of the world, at the end of your rope. That's the bitter end. And it has a lot of connotations through literature and through the English language, the way people use it. But the bitter end means a lot of things to a lot of different people. Now, if you're the kind of sailor that your idea of getting on a boat and going cruising or sailing or working on the water is to escape from the land and from the social responsibility and from the social pressures of a modern world, then being at the bitter end is important and pressing to your mind, because in a sense you can't go any further. In a sense, you're sort of locked at the edge of the world. And if you're standing there on the bow of your boat, or you're standing on the deck of Saba Rock and you're talking to Burt about life and philosophy, which he was very good at talking about, and you realize that you are alone in this world. You make your own choices. The face of the world that you give to it is different than the face that is inside you. And Burt mentioned this to me just in passing, and it didn't directly relate to the conversation, but the words sort of kind of stuck. And it was nothing has changed in man except his method of transportation. We're all the same people. We're the same as all the pirates, as all the explorers that came before us. We have the same emotional feelings of all the explorers. Now, Virgin Gorda was named by Christopher Columbus as he sailed by, because if you look at Virgin Gorda from a distance, it looks like a, quote-unquote in Spanish, a fat woman, or a virgin. They love to call everybody a virgin, laying sideways. You have these two humps. Well, the last hump to the north is where you will find, on the other side, inside the Sound, you will find the Bitter End Yacht Club. Now, the Bitter End Yacht Club really took some devastating blows, and they're rebuilding it right now from Hurricane Irma. The same with Saba Rock. They're working on it, they're rebuilding it. But it also kind of brings to the front of how fragile things are in the Caribbean when you have hurricanes, and how belligerent we can be as a people to say, I'm going to build this even stronger. And the stronger we build it, the better we build it. It always seems to, there's more weather coming. Mother Nature, she's strong. She doesn't care. And that's why you find a lot of these wrecks all over the Caribbean. Steamships, essentially, were sunk. And because of hurricanes, they didn't have a system to tell you when the hurricanes were coming. They knew the season. They knew what to look for when it was happening. Okay? But when that happened, they had no way to go. There was no speed to get out of the way of a hurricane. They had to just find a place to hide. And sometimes they would put out to sea because they felt it would be better to be out at sea. And there was all these wrecks. And this is what Burt did. Burt was somebody who was always looking for wrecks. But one of the wrecks is not a wreck at all. One of the treasures of kind of like the Hall of Fame of treasures, let's put it that way. And it has absolutely nothing to do with money and everything to do with history. Was they've been looking, and Burt had an idea of exactly where this is, and this is something that reoccurred in our conversations all the time, was looking for where the body of Sir Francis Drake was buried. Now, Sir Francis Drake was credited with defeating the Spanish Armada invasion of England in 1588. He also became the first Englishman to circumnavigate the world. And as a Navy officer, he sort of drifted into piracy. And this is a kind of an interesting... How one drifts into piracy is not that hard to understand, but it's also not what you think. Drake drifted into piracy and was one of the earliest promoters of the slave trade. bringing African men and women to work in English colonies in North America during the 16th century. A very kind of interesting and, shall we say, kind of evil sort of guy. I don't. This whole concept of how people could justify doing this to other people is almost beyond me. It really is, to see this happen. But in any case, here we are. We're on this island, and we're at what we call the bitter end, and we're facing the ocean, and we're talking to a truly, truly, truly old salt. And the whole idea of this Drake thing. Now, the thing is that Sir Francis Drake died of dysentery in 1596. And he had actually carried a lead coffin on his ship. It's off the coast. He was put in the coffin, full suit of armor. The ring that he was wearing is like one of the great treasure, could be one of the great treasure finds of all time. It's supposed to be quite a big deal. And it's off the coast of Panama and Portobello. And it's quite a large area. Many archaeologists and divers have been there. Burt had been there. And there was always this thing that he had in his mind, like, I know I can find this. I know I can find this. And at the time, I'm thinking, like, when I knew him, it was, he was, I don't know, 75, 80 years old, somewhere in that neighborhood. And he still wanted to put together a team to go and check it out and to find it. He was convinced that he could find it. This attitude of being convinced that you could find treasure in a giant ocean is kind of a special attitude. And it's one of tremendous belief in yourself and hope, positive hope. So the other idea about standing at the bitter end of life, or the bitter end of your exploration, is your own growth. And I have to give Burt some credit in a very small way to my own growth at that time, that I began to understand what it was like to look beyond what I was doing as a job. My job was as a charter boat captain. Food, charming, drink, stories, sailing people day after day. Hello, how are you? Being very collegial and, making sure everybody's safe, having them have a marvelous time, because in general, people come on your charter, it's the vacation of their lifetimes. A lot won't come back, but some do. And that's a whole different story. But that's what your job is. And it's a very demanding job physically. It's a very demanding job emotionally. I've often been asked why I stopped chartering. And my answer has always been I ran out of charm. I got tired of people, coming and, being on my boat. I guess I was getting a bit cantankerous in that way, but just those things just were not working out for me after 18 years, of course. So the next part of this, what I loved about with Burt was this whole last pirate of the Caribbean kind of idea. Because in fact, he really wasn't a pirate. He was a first class, out of the box, original scuba diver. He set a record as being the oldest scuba diver in the world when he was diving at 90 years old. He did pass away at 93. He left a lot of memories to a lot of people. And he was a character beyond all characters. And because of this idea of being a character, he always made me he always made me self-aware of my own characterization. And I think this goes back to the fact that I have all my life been searching for something that is authentic and authentic in me. And I've been restless in this concept, in this idea. It's something that has driven me. And I know there's a lot of people out there that the same idea happens to you. You suppress it to a certain degree, but that restlessness of finding out what your authenticity is. I mean, I could look at somebody and hear somebody speak, and they're not authentic. I could tell right off the bat, half a sentence in, not authentic. Don't know what they're talking about. All right. But somebody who does, and who is truly authentic, and it doesn't matter who you are, what your profession is, what your class is, what your race is, that authentic sense of being is hugely, hugely important. And this relates to the idea of what Christmas is about. You know, Christmas is about finding your home. It's about that relationship between all of family, the general thoughtfulness and the gratitude for the people that are close to you. It has its religious aspects to it, but in general, it's really a way for people to sort of reconnect. Now, if you're a sailor and you're spending all your time on Christmas at the edge of the world, okay, with people you don't know, the person that you are actually celebrating the gratitude and congeniality with, and the experience and the robustness of your life, is somebody like Burt Kilbride. It's an interesting thing, but it's like just we would sit in these wooden slat chairs and we would drink rum and we would talk about sailing and we would talk about diving, because I was a diver as well. And it would be just a conversation of, he knew he didn't have to perform for me as a character. And I found that when I was on charter, and even today, I have this need to perform, which I'm doing now, but I have this need to perform. But there was more about the thoughtfulness and the gratitude of, it's really nice that you're here in this part of the world, that you are this person. And it gave me insights into myself. It gave me insights into, what a pirate was. Okay, because a pirate, like our friend Sir Francis Drake, who slid into piracy from being a naval officer, was really just a quibble of terms. During this period in which the Spanish galleons were coming out of Cuba and Central America and South America, they were loaded with gold and riches. The Spanish had been exploiting South America like nobody's ever exploited anywhere in the world. And the place was loaded with these things. And a lot of these boats sank. A lot of these boats were a part of the war. The galleons, the English were fighting the Spanish and the French and the Spanish and the English. And all these allegiances in Europe were going on and on and on. It was very difficult for a man who had a hard time earning a life or a living on land, because life on land was a horrible, horrible time. It was very difficult to feed your family. If you had a family, it was very difficult to maintain a trade. It was just, in the English, they would just come and knock you on the head and take you on a boat, and you might be on a boat for the next 5, 6, 10 years. And then you would become a sailor, even though that your original job was as a seamstress or a farmer. So the desperation that people felt was salved with their presence in the way a ship works. It's a community. It's a community of people. It's a community of respect for whatever jobs there are. Very tight quarters, very difficult life, but nothing more. It wasn't more difficult than being on the land. In fact, sleeping 18 inches apart was, that was good. It was dry. It was good. You had the potential of becoming rich. And this is how these captains, they had letters of marque. They could go and with a letter of marque, you could go and take a Spanish guy and take all of the stuff. You would get percentages. The crew would get percentages. Everybody was great. It wasn't piracy. The same thing was an act of piracy. If you didn't have a letter of marque, that was an act of piracy. And it wasn't until the English literally wrote a law that saying that piracy should be, you can hang directly, immediately. If you're accused of piracy, literally, if you're accused of piracy, you're going to die. You're going to be hung from the highest yardarm. This context of The Last Pirate, this context of being at the bitter end, and this context of being there for Christmas, makes one think of the little joys that these sailors would have in their lives. These islands were seen by Columbus. They were seen by Sir Francis Drake. They were seen by every pirate sailor that ever came across the ocean to look for their fortune. And this is where you have your boat on a mooring and you're standing there and you're thinking to yourself, how do I, as a sailor, and I'm also include women in this idea, how do I, as a sailor, fit into this particular world, this world of the sea, of the openness, of the lack of social constraint, of being on the edge of a free fall of not having a responsibility to a social system, but you have your own social system, and that social system happens to be what's on your boat. I found it quite difficult on a charter boat because the people would come for Christmas and they would leave, and we would have a great time, and we'd have a wonderful time. Don't get me wrong. We'd do water sports, we'd go snorkeling, we'd go diving, and we'd do all sorts of things. The people love sailing, that's why they were on a charter, and they loved sailing my boat, which was, a big, beautiful, smooth kind of Bentley-like boat, which is what you could call a CT-54. It's kind of like a Bentley of boats. Smooth and just takes the waves, and it didn't knock you up. And it was customized sailing, hors d'oeuvres and drinks and sail. It was nice. You could get a little wild and woolly, but mostly in the Virgin Islands, you're inside kind of a giant pond, so to speak. So the water is relatively calm. The waves don't really exist. They're wind waves for the most part. And you can get a good 15-knot breeze, and the boat will just go, and you can put as much sail up as you want and just rip it back and forth across the bays, come up to the North Sound, go dancing in Virgin Gorda proper, and you could do lots and lots of wonderful things, because the Caribbean is kind of like a theme park for kids and adults. Saba Rock with Burt and Gail, his wife, is sort of an adult bar at the edge of the empire, which, if I was going to make a movie about, a man, at the end of his rope, at the bitter end of his rope, I would place it on Saba Rock. And that's where he would have to face his maker, standing on Saba Rock and looking out at the ocean. And, you know, what are you going to do? You know, and ponder the fate of your life, and to ponder the isolation, and to learn how to deal with the isolation, because that's what I'm always leading up to is that chartering and being at the bitter end, and it's all this fun and this sort of glitter and glamour and all the rest of the stuff. It's still, for the captain, is a moment of realization about how isolated one is in their life. And I credit Burt for recognizing this before I did. I thought I was out there having fun and, you know, drinking with the people and partying and being the guy and having fun, telling stories, blah, blah, blah. And it was just, you know, over and over. And I realized that the sense of being a person, being a captain, and is essentially you're isolated, you're alone. You're at the edge of the empire, the bitter end. You're standing there and you are by yourself. And that's where Christmas comes in. Christmas is not a time to be by yourself. Christmas is a time to find love, is to reach out, to be embraced, and to embrace family. It's about thoughtfulness. It's not about gift giving. It's about making sure that you have that through line from the people who know you, who love you, and who possess the love for you, who sustain you. And in all of this, I feel sorry for all those pirates out there who never realized, or maybe they did realize, and the isolation pushed them to do acts of horrible in all nature, because being a pirate wasn't a good deal. It was a vicious life. Sir Francis Drake's a perfect example. He died of dysentery. He had a little fleet there. He knew it was a vicious life. And Burt knew life was fun. Knew life was to be enjoyed. Knew life was to be embraced and eaten and wallowed in and have fun with. But he also knew that life was about being isolated in your own individuality. So this Christmas, if any of you are out there sailing in the Windward Islands, go into the North Sound. Bitter End Yacht Club is still being rebuilt. Saba Rock is still being rebuilt. But it's worth kind of going in, dropping the hook. The reefs are still there. The nature is still there. It's still the edge of the world. Have a drink. Celebrate the life of the last living pirate. And celebrate your own connection. And that your isolation isn't as difficult as it could be when you consider pirates, 16th century, the loss of life being so prevalent in your day-to-day life. We live in a remarkable time in which we can slip into this dalliance as sailors and look beyond the reef and see the ocean and understand that there is danger out there. There is a great deal of danger out there. But it's all about fulfilling that search in you, that growth, and it keeps you alive and generous, and it keeps you as the character that you truly are. So, to all my friends, to all my listeners, I wish you a very, very Merry Christmas. By the way, it's been fantastic, your support, and we really appreciate it. And we wish you a Merry Christmas and a very, very Happy New Year.
thanks for sharing, Scott. That was a great story. It sounds like this guy was a real character, the last real pirate of the Caribbean.
Yeah, he was the real deal. There was no doubt about that. Vast amount of knowledge and experience, and really, Burt was just a super, super nice guy.
Yeah, I've usually actually celebrated Christmas and New Year's on some tropical island in Asia somewhere. So I understand the feeling and the emotion of just wanting to kind of get away from it all for the holidays, away from all the hustle and bustle and the crowds. But going off of that, what do we have planned for next week's episode?
Well, next week we're going to do a recap of the year. We've had a great year, a great deal of listenership, and we're going to talk about some of our more popular episodes, and essentially just kind of stay in the whole festive holiday spirit.
Great. Everybody have a happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and we'll see you in a week.
Merry Christmas. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you for tuning in. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, be sure to rate and review. You can find us on Facebook and at offshoreexplorer.org. You can also listen to past episodes at offshore-explorer.simplecast.com. Our theme song is sung by Paulette McWilliams, with additional music by Amanu Itomi and Tommy Twang.
Until next time, fair winds and calm seas.